That world of Responsa. Thank you. And here we are. Fascinating stuff, this. Rambam's Igeret Hashmad. Now, so what's Maimonides, the 26-year-old, going to say when the foreign rabbi's letter circulated amongst the Anusim, his co-religionists, who said the Shahada? The Almohades came and said, either you say the Shahada or you.
My prayer glasses, please.
Thank you, Brian. We all know about your need for glasses. Excellent. So there we are. The letter circulated, terrible letter. Everybody gets very dispirited, downhearted. We're all sinners. Terrible time. This is where the greatness of a responder comes in. This is what the stuff of tshuvot, I should say, is all about. Doing something different than what you find in the black letter law. So we talked about the letter. We talked about the situation of the Jews in Morocco and in Spain. And now let's see what Maimonides did. First of all, there's an outline of the letter. So, looking at my screen, Robert, can you unmute? And would you like to read? 5. Line 5.
After criticizing the responder for acting in an impulsive, unscholarly, and irresponsible manner, Maimonides,
the 26-year-old, was full of confidence, even at his age, and no problem saying, you are impulsive, unscholarly, and irresponsible for writing the letter that you did. Maimonides
cites various midrashim to the effect that Moshe, Elijah, and Yeshayahu were all punished for unveiling against Israel for their sins.
Okay, so let's take each one of these. What's Maimonides is, of course, extremely sophisticated. So he begins by criticizing the rabbi. He says, you wrote this letter attacking the Jews who said the Shahada to save their lives or their property or to gain some time. How dare you? What happened to Moshe Rabbeinu when he criticized Israel? When did he criticize Israel? He said when God told him to redeem them, "Vehen lo ya'aminu li," they will not believe me. But they did. Vayamein ha'am. And Moshe was punished. His hand became leprous. As we know from the Miriam story, when you say Lashon Hara, your hand becomes leprous. And Maimonides cites the full midrash. The end of the day, although if you like, Moshe Rabbeinu accused Bnei Israel of going over to the Egyptian lifestyle and their idolatry and not being Mekadesh Hashem, what happened to him? Was Moshe Rabbeinu a Mekadesh Hashem? Answer.
He then cites midrashic evidence that Rabbi Meir...
No, I haven't finished. Haven't even begun. Question is, was Moshe a Mekadesh Hashem or not? Or was he a Mechalel Hashem? My voice on the left says Mekadesh, but that's absolutely wrong. What happened to Moshe at the end of his career? Because
he accuses the people of being rebels.
He was not Mekadesh Hashem at Mei Meriva. The Rambam says, look there, even Moshe Rabbeinu, when he talks about a generation that was at the Mem Tet Sharei Tumah, the 49th gate of impurity, Bnei Israel in Egypt, and Moshe dares say, you are a bad lot, you have no faith, he's punished. Not only immediately does his hand turn white as a leper, but Jean, he was not a Mekadesh Hashem. Okay? Twice, 3 times we're told, Shelo hakdisheni b'mei meriva. So there it says, now Eliyahu Hanavi, what's the story with Eliyahu Hanavi? What does he do? After the great trial on Mount Carmel, what happens? Okay, he kills 400 prophets of Baal. Everything looks as if it's going to be hunky-dory. But what happens? Jezebel comes along, and of course people go back to their sinful state, and Eliyahu Hanavi is on the run. By Yarots, okay, he runs and he goes into the wilderness of Chorev, and he's by the brook of Kerit. And how does he live? The ravens bring him meat, and he has water from the brook. He's alone in the desert, and then God appears to him. Remember, in three forms: there's the storm, the fire, and the earthquake. And in the end, there's a still small voice. And God says, Malacha po Eliyahu. Why are you here? You're meant to be a prophet looking after my flock. Why are you running away into the wilderness? And then he says, Bnei Israel asher azvu et briti. Bnei Israel, they've left, they've neglected the covenant. They have killed all the prophets. I'm the only one. And God says, if that's all you can say, you're a liar. Bnei Israel always maintain the Brit, and from now on, you will go to every single Brit that every single Jew is going to make until the end of time. Hence, what's the name of the chair we put the baby on at the Brit Milah? Eliyahu. He has to keep on going to learn that you do not give up on the Jewish people. Finally, Yeshayahu. And that is another instance, another case in which Yeshayahu says, I am living in an meis fatayim, a people who are of unclean lips. And then God says, who are you calling unclean lips? And an angel has to come and place the glowing ember on Yeshayahu's lips in order for him to be purified. So Rambam begins his letter by really having a go at the foreign rabbi who is impulsive, unscholarly, and irresponsible, and has accused Bnei Israel of basically becoming meshumadim in the worst possible way, and therefore there's no hope for them, and they are all black sinners. Now, he then goes on. Robert, you can have another couple of lines, please. 7. He then
cites midrashic evidence that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer feigned heathenism during a time of Shmad in order to save their lives.
Now,
finally,
I'm stopping you.
Yes,
this is in Avodah Zarah, Yud Chet, and what they did was Rabbi Meir pretended to eat treif, but he didn't really eat treif, but he saved his life. Rabbi Eliezer gave an ambiguous answer to a heathen who threatened his life unless he accepted some form of heathenism. And in each case, these great rabbis didn't feel that they were prohibited from feigning, that is, pretending to be what they weren't in order to save their lives, even though they seem to be passing themselves off as either heathens or heretics. Okay? And this was in a time of Shmad, when according to the theoretical halacha, you have to give up your life for the slightest and smallest avera. We all know that in times of Shmad, when there is a concerted effort to attack Judaism, and every Jew who has an opportunity to die for the sake of not performing that slight sin, okay, and passes it up, is a mechalel Hashem. Mechalel Hashem. And you should rather die, okay, especially if there are 10 Israelites who will witness what you are doing. So Rambam goes to Agadah. He goes to the stories, and he goes to real life, not strict black letter law, in order to create a background for what is going to be a letter of encouragement rather than a letter of condemnation. Now, finally, he cites another midrashic.
Finally, he cites the midrashic idea that the three wicked evildoers, namely Ahab, Eglon, king of Moab, and Nebuchadnezzar, were all rewarded for one single good deed, despite their lives of wickedness, in order to justify rewarding the good works performed in secret by the forced pseudo-apostates of the time.
The Jews who pretended to convert, remember, we're going to talk about the pseudo aspect, a pretense of conversion. The foreign rabbis said any mitzvot they do after they've said the Shahada are worth nothing at all. So Maimonides dips into Midrash. He says, Ahab did 2 hours of tshuva, and on the basis of those 2 hours, his fate was spared, and he wasn't punished in the way that he might have been punished in God's original plan. Eglon, king of Moab, who sent a respectful reply to the king of Israel, had an ancestress called Ruth, who became the ancestress of the Mashiach. Nebuchadnezzar also, for a courteous reply, was rewarded. So we're setting up a midrashic background. It's not halakha, but it is rhetorically valuable. Okay? We are now going to be less charitable in our approach to the foreign responder than we might have been. Okay. Marcel, would you like to read, please? Maimonides. Line 13. But you have to unmute. Marcel? Marcel, have you unmuted? Is your sound working? Can't hear a thing. Okay, we will go down the list and let you see if you can solve the problem. Jack, are you ready to read?
Yes, sir. Maimonides then addresses himself to the halachic aspects of Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of the name, and its opposite, Chilul Hashem, the desecration of the holy name, in the present context. His first argument is that, unlike the responder, he does not believe that Islam is idolatry. See his response to Avadia, the righteous proselyte of Baghdad, June number 8448.
Which we're going to be reading next week, okay? Now, this is a very important point to make. The foreign responder was not living in an Islamic country. We don't know who he is. We have no record of his name or who it was. But clearly, he lived in a Christian milieu. And as such, he believed that Islam, like Christianity, was a form of idolatry, Avodah Zarah. Rambam was very insistent that Islam is not Avodah Zarah. Okay? So that's his starting point, and therefore, we're not talking about classical Avodah Zarah. So if you talk about Allah, okay, you're not talking about a pagan god. You're not talking about Lo Taseh Lecha Elohim Acherim Al Panai, something much less innocuous that could be a stage on the way to bringing the world close to Judaism. And this is a theory that the Rambam has. But in any case, halachically speaking, most of the Sephardi authorities believed that Islam was not idolatry. If you think about it, Islam is not idolatrous. It is absolutely dead set against idols, images, anything that makes God physical. Now that would be very in touch, very in keeping with Maimonides' own theology, which was strictly against anything anthropomorphic. So let's have a look. Jack, in Hilchot Ma'achalot Asurot.
In Hilchot Ma'achalot Asurot, Maimonides rules that the wine of a non-idolatrous Gentiles, such as the Ishmaelites, may not be drunk, but benefit may be derived from it.
In other
And
words,
this
it
was
is
the ruling
mutar,
of all the Geonim.
it is mutar b'hana'ah. If it was real yein nesech, it would be asur b'hana'ah. Okay, so we don't drink it, but it's not asur b'hana'ah. So if Islam is not idolatry, then line 19, in Maimonides' view, please, Jack, in Maimonides' view, therefore,
Therefore, the Shahada is an empty declaration. According to the responder, however, Islam is a form of idolatry, and one who admits idolatry is tantamount to denying the entire Torah.
מי שמודה בעבודה זרה, כאילו כופר בכל התורה כולה. That's the Sifrei on this week's Parsha, Shlach, okay? Hence,
As one who declares the Shahada is an idolater.
now all the Muslims wanted from the Jews was to say Allah is God and Muhammad is his prophet. The first point that Maimonides makes is that it is doubtful, very doubtful that Islam is idolatry. If it's not idolatry, then what you're doing is saying something which is not necessarily a good thing to say. It doesn't reach the level of Hamodeh Ba'avodah Zara. Okay, it's not Avodah Zara. So therefore, all the Jews that are Anusim, remember this is in the 12th century, 200 years before the Christian oppression of the Jews. It's in a Muslim country, and if Islam is not a form of idolatry, then we can already be more flexible. Marcel, are you back in Comunicado? No. Okay.
Question.
Ian, by all means.
Would you say today that the cult of loving of death is tantamount to, of the jihadist Islamists today, is tantamount to Avodah Zarah?
The only issue is whether Islam as a religion is Avodah Zarah. Rambam, the Ran, Radbaz, all the Sephardic authorities, almost to a man, said no. Not a form of Avodah Zarah. It's a misplaced belief. I'm not going to say it's like Reform Judaism, okay? But I'm going to say that it is some type of wrong turn that a whole group of people made. Therefore, for us, whether you declare the Shahada or not is not the right thing to do. It would be better if you didn't. But if you had to, it's not a biblical offense. Now, what you do in the name of Islam is an entirely different matter. There are different views. But once you say that Islam is not a form of idolatry, then whatever the Muslims do is not an idolatrous act. And if you copy it, it's not an idolatrous act. That's what we're saying here. I'm not talking about the content of Islam. Was what they did nice? The Almohadis? No, it was not nice. And we wouldn't like that at all. But this jihad is not new. Okay? The Almohadis, as we learned, burst out of North Africa in the 12th century, and they believed that they were needed to impose the Quran and the sword. And nothing's changed. Nothing's changed, okay? So, Harvey, can you unmute and read line 23? Maimonides goes on.
Maimonides goes on to argue that the ubiquitous Talmudic principle of dispensation from punishment in the case of duress, ones, also applies in the context of a Chilul Hashem in the time of Shemad.
Now, this is very interesting. Maimonides goes to the heart of the matter. He says that if you're an anus, if you're forced, and if you do anything, in fact, as a result of coercion, the legal validity of that act is impugned. So if you're forced to sell your property because somebody is pointing a gun at your head, then the sale will not be a valid sale, and you go to two witnesses after the gun has been removed and you say, what I sold was against my will. It was because I was forced to in order to save my life. Now, Rambam says you can apply this in time of Shmad as well. Now, how does he know? Harvey, please, this dispensation.
This dispensation includes the death penalty, karet and malkut.
So you will never get the death penalty. You will never get karet or malkut for apostasy, okay, changing of faith as a result of a threat. Now, how does Maimonides know this? Read on, please, Harvey.
Maimonides' source is the Midrash Halacha on Numbers 15:30, and the person who worships idols in a holy manner shall be cut off from his people. The phrase holy manner, Beyad Ramah, excludes an anus who is acting either to save his life or even his property.
So Midrash Halacha, okay, you have to know a lot in order to get there. Midrash Halacha says that the prohibition on idolatry, which is mentioned in Bamidbar Tetvav coming up, okay, whoever worships an idol biyad Ramah, okay, v'nichrata nefesh hahi me'ameha. Now, Yad Ramah does not include coercion or being forced. All right. Now, he also finds a similar Midrash Halacha. None of this is in the Gemara, okay? It's in the Midrash Halacha. There's a similar exegesis. Harvey, please, 29. There's a similar exegesis.
There's a similar exegesis in the Torat Kohanim in relation to Vayikra 26 regarding the service of the idol Molech.
Can we have muting, please? Somebody is. I can't see anyone who's not muted. That's why it's strange. Okay. Harvey, please.
Okay, I'll read it again. This is the similar exegesis in Torat Kohanim in relation to Vayikra 26 regarding the service of the idol Molech. V'shamati et panei
b'ishahu v'lo b'ishahu. I will set my face against that person, says the pasuk, and ran the Midrash Halacha says v'lo anus v'lo shogeg v'lo mut'eh. B'ishahu means a man who's completely competent, not somebody who is forced, not somebody who is inadvertent, doesn't know what they're doing. No, who is unaware that it is prohibited, or mut'eh, somebody who's been led astray. They think they're sending a birthday card to their wife, but actually it's a get. Okay, that's mut'eh, because there's a concept called get mut'eh. But in any case, the upshot is, Harvey, only someone who is...
Only someone who is fully competent will be liable. Also, someone who does not choose martyrdom still retains his legal status with respect to being able to act as a qualified witness, provided he has not committed one of those sins that render him unfit to testify. The flip side of the duress point is that the Jewish side has no intention of testifying to the truth of Islam, but his motive is totally ulterior, meaning to protect his life and property. In such a case, the prohibition of Chilul Hashem does not apply even in times of Shemad.
And we've all grown up on the Gemara. I'm sure that Jean will agree that in times of Shemad, even changing the color of your sandal strap, okay, the Jewish sandal strap, just heard a dakog there, is forbidden. You should give up your life. But Rambam takes a totally different tack, and he marshals his sources, and he said, one, Islam is not Avodah Zarah, not that type of Shemad. Number two, anus, coercion, relieves you of punishment and is also beyond the pale of a deliberate act of apostasy. So we have two counts. Now, Chilul Hashem is next. Ian, you're on. Can you unmute, please?
But it is against the Gemara, the normal way of the Gemara. It's a little
Exactly.
bit far-fetched.
Exactly. So I'm at the end of the Shiur, we're going to talk about this as to what Rambam is doing. Is it halacha, or is it rhetoric, or is it rhetoric, or is it something else, or is it something in between? And is it the job of a meshiv, of a true responder? Okay. So
But here he's not a Meshiv.
this, right, and I'm going to argue, Jean, that Igeret Hashmad is the equivalent of a tshuva. No different to Rambam's other tshuvot, which, as we'll see, and as we have seen, are full of empathy and sympathy. His tshuva on Giur. And we're going to have a look at his tshuvot Ovadia Get Tzedek mi Baghdad. This is what the Meshiv does, and the Rambam has a very good idea. It's called an Igeret because it's very long, and it's addressed to a very controversial and topical point, but it's the same type of quality, okay? So we're finding our way around the halakha.
But hasn't he gone, Rabbi, hasn't he gone way too far regarding the service of the idol Molech, which might, I know we don't know exactly, but might involve the lives of children?
It might, but presumably, if you are an anus, and if you're a shogeg, and if you're a mut'eh, then you would be able to claim at least that you should not be punished. Now, whether Molech, it says ma'avir beno uvito. It doesn't say to burn them. And as far as we know, it was passing the children over fire. I think that that's probably the consensus. And the idea again of burning the children is not found in other sources of a non-Jewish nature. Sacrifice of a child, yes, but not necessarily in the context of the idol Molech. And in Gei Ben Hinnom, what we do know is that there no children were killed. It was all an act of passing over, okay? Passing through fire, little bit like a fakir, I guess, but everything was rigged so nothing would happen. But the point is taken, and it bears a little further research.
Can I still ask a question? Can I still ask a question?
Sure, yeah.
According to the Rambam, then, when is one mechayev to go to martyrdom and be killed instead of committing the 3 cardinal sins of
one of which is avodah zarah.
Right.
Okay.
So according to him, when must one take that option?
So the first point the Rambam would make is that avodah zarah is not Islam. So Christianity, yes. Any of the Far Eastern religions, yes. But remember, he as a Meshiv is only dealing with this particular case. So he marshals all the arguments he can to get this particular type of act off the hook in terms of a prohibited act mid-deoraita, okay? So he will say that if it is real avodah zarah, and we'll see if it is an act that you do, like we haven't finished yet, bowing down, say, Haman Mordechai, but not saying a word, and you have a true intention when you say the word, and the person who is forcing you to say to make you bow down knows what he's doing in order to make, or like in the days of the Greeks, pagans came along, the period of Hanukkah, they said, you must eat pork, okay, in front of a pagan idol, and in front of 10 fellow Jews. That is an act that requires Kiddush Hashem, okay? No question. The question is, what about saying the Shahada in the middle of the 12th century, okay? Or I should say the 13th century. Let's read on, okay? Harvey, thank you. Brian, can you unmute? Does taking an oath of allegiance
Not taking an oath of allegiance to Islam, which is what the Shahada is, a Chilul Hashem. Maimonides uses the view of Bet Hillel in Mishnah in Nedarim that one is permitted to take a false oath in order to save one's life, property, or to escape the tax collector in order to answer this question in the negative.
I must qualify, it's a Roman tax collector, okay, like Florus, the evil procurator of Judea, and we are all paying our taxes, okay? But when the Romans came along and used tax collection and all sorts of cruel methods to stamp out Jewish resistance, Bet Hillel say you can take a false shvuah, not only a neder, but a shvuah, okay? Which is very serious on a holy object like a Sefer Torah. Brian, please. Maimonides also emphasizes.
Maimonides also emphasizes that Kiddush Hashem is not only a matter of theology, but also of virtue. The Anusim can reach a very high level of Kiddush Hashem if they become paragons of ethical virtue.
So this is the typical Maimonidean move. He says you're all caught up on Kiddush Hashem on a theological level, but remember, the true Mekadesh Hashem is a person whose everyday life, whose routine, whose quotidian life activities show a high level of ethical sensitivity, okay? That's just an aside, but it's all part of the Maimonidean campaign to push this point. Now, number 6, this is very important, and this is an answer to Jack. Jeff, I don't know you, I don't think, but if you can unmute, you could introduce yourself, but you have to unmute.
Okay, I'm not only unmuted, but you know me very well. It's
Jeff Bloch, wow.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff.
How are you doing?
Baruch Hashem, very well, wow.
I'm here in Efrat. We come
Yeah.
here very frequently, as most of our children and grandchildren live here. So we have an apartment here and come here, as I say, quite frequently. And better or for worse, we're here even more frequently, given
The present
current events.
circumstances.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyhow, shalom aleichem, good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Ask you to read from line 6, Maimonides.
Yes, okay. Where are we? Maimonides.
Insists.
Here we are. Maimonides insists that there is a very clear distinction between deed and speech in the present context. Although pretending to bow down to an idol is prohibited, uttering an idolatrous formula like the Shahada is not subject to any penalty whatsoever.
In other words, there's a distinction between word and deed. And all of the examples of classical Kiddush Hashem are bowing down, throwing a stone like the Even Markulis. They're all physical acts. Now we know that speech in halakha doesn't have the same level. And and if you transgress, for example, lo taneh b'reacha et shaker, do not bear false witness against your neighbor, do you get a punishment like lashing for that? The answer is no, you don't, because it is a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. It's a law that doesn't have Gemara Makot, Daf Gimel, correct? Daf Bet. So here too, what we see is that the Rambam pulls out all the stops. Shahada is only saying, it's not doing. Moreover, Jeff, please, line 9, moreover.
Moreover, in this case, the authority imposing the Shahada knows full well that the Jewish side is entirely insincere in his declaration of testimony.
Now, this is what I want to really push here, and that the Rambam says that the Almohadis, okay, the princes and the rulers who imposed the Shahada on the Jews and the Christians knew full well that they were not being sincere, okay? So the Jew is not sincere, the imposer of the Shmad is not sincere. Total lack of sincerity for anybody who is a bit intelligent in relation to changing your religion must yield the result that your changing of religion is entirely worthless. It is a bluff. And if we all know that, then it becomes far less serious than the whole concept of changing your religion in time of Shema. There's no changing of religion here at all. And the next point I have bolded because it's really very important indeed, and I've called it a particularly subtle point. Okay, and it follows on from what we've just said. Although I'm actually going to put that on hold for a second or two. And I want to develop something here which I think is fairly original. So I'm going to go down. And I'm going to go to Takia. I'm on page 5. I'm on line 33. Now, if you learn a little bit of Islamic theology, turns out that pretending to change your faith when you're under threat is actually permitted under Islamic law. It's called taqiyya. And Rambam was a great expert on Islamic law and theology. He was also a great expert on idolatry, on paganism, as he says in the Moreh Nevuchim. For those of us who have read Moreh Nevuchim, and some of us in this group have, with me, not such a long time ago, we read that he read every single book that there was about the Sabians, about paganism, and therefore interprets many biblical laws as being anti-pagan manifestations. But he was respected as a theologian by the Muslims. And it's interesting, if you read articles by contemporary Muslim theologians, they're a bit embarrassed because medieval Muslim theologians cite Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, and modern Islamic theologians don't like that. So they say, well, the Jews are deceitful and they're cunning and they're awful. But Maimonides actually converted to Islam. Remember, Jean, we're back there. The Muslims claim Maimonides as one of their own, okay? And we remember this this episode, we talked about this. So for them, Maimonides alone amongst all the Jewish rabbis is kosher, as it were. He's halal, all right? But he was an expert. And I really want to get the taqiyya brought to our attention, because I think it could cast a lot of light on this. Caroline, can you unmute and give us line 34?
I try.
Thank you. And you usually succeed very well. Taqiyya.
Taqiyya, concealing one's religion in order to save one's life in Islamic theology. Taqiyya is the act of maintaining secrecy or mystifying one's beliefs when one's life or property is threatened. It was existed since the early days of Islam, when early Muslims did so to avoid persecution or violence by non-Muslim governments or individuals. Later, Shia Muslims and Sufis developed...
In other words, all those groups that were somewhat on the fringe, and the Almohadis were Shia, okay, and also the Sufis, developed taqiyya
as a method of self-preservation and protection in hostile environments. In Sunni Islamic law, as in Islamic law in general, the concept of intention holds great importance.
And we see that in the Rambam too, okay? The intentionality, the inner meaning is more important than the external act. Merely performing an act
without the right intention is considered insufficient.
So if you kiss a mezuzah because you think that it's going to protect your home, you are an idolater, okay? Just to take a very quick trip into Maimonidean Jewish theology. A fatwa
issued by Ibn Abi Yuma highlights the significance of one's inner state and intention in determining their identity as a Muslim. According to this fatwa, if taqiyya is practiced with the right intention, It is not considered sinful, but rather a pious act. The fatwa emphasizes that God values the intention of believers over their outward actions, and taqiyya can be seen as a form of outward expression aligned with the correct intention. This practice is emphasized in schism, whereby adherents are permitted to conceal their beliefs when under threat of persecution or compulsion.
So you can see where I'm going. Rambam lived in his time. The Muslim world, Sephardic world, was a world in which Muslim theology was well known, and both Jews and Muslims knew that if you converted insincerely, this was not a sin. This was not a sin. In fact, it was a good thing to do because you never intended. Now, Rambam's Igeret Hashmad, and I don't know how often this has been noticed, makes a big deal of this fact that the Jewish side doesn't intend to become a Muslim, and the Muslim side knows that when the Shahada is recited, it's not sincere. But we all go through the motions because of the taqiyya, and part of the culture is that it can be done. Now, this, of course, will also explain why, from a theological point of view, Sephardic Jewry in the 13th century, Anusim, 1160, the 12th century, when Almohades burst onto the scene. Why did so many Jews, long before Spain, became Muslims and pretended Marranos? Okay? Because this was part of the Muslim culture and theology. It also spoke to Aristotelianism, to what Rambam believed in terms of inner intention being more important than external acts. Add on to that the halachic issues of Islam is not idolatry. This is a question of honest. It is a question of speaking and not doing. Then you have a huge program here in favor of not denaturalizing the Anusim, keeping them within the fold, encouraging them to keep doing their Jewish thing. Okay? Now, can we have the rest, please? Line 6. Caroline, you're doing fantastically. Following the end of the Reconquista, that is the Christian reconquest of Spain and Portugal,
of the Iberian Peninsula in 1492, Muslims were persecuted by the Catholic monarchs and forced to convert to Christianity or face expulsion. The principle of taqiyya became very important for Muslims during the Inquisition in the 16th century Spain, as it allowed them to convert to Christianity while remaining crypto-Muslims, practicing Islam in secret. In 1504,
which is 4, 5, which is 8, 9, 10, 12 years after 1492. Okay, Ubayd Allah al-Wakharani,
a Maliki Mufti in Oran issued a fatwa allowing Muslims to make extensive use of concealment to maintain their faith, but recantation is required as quickly as possible.
Now we'll see that the Rambam says that you've got to leave as soon as it is convenient and as you can. But now I'm going back to where we left off, and against this background, I think you can understand why Rambam talked about the fact that the authority imposing the Shahada knows full well that the Jewish side is entirely insincere and is okay with that. In stark contrast to Christianity. It is therefore also not surprising that in 1094, when Ashkenazi Jews in Speyer, Worms, and Mainz were threatened with baptism, which is an act by crusaders, by Christianity, they chose to die. But in the Sephardic world, a different culture, a different approach, and that may account for the difference between the two worlds. Anusim in the Sephardic world in the 12th century, the Marranos in the 15th and the 16th century, as opposed to the Crusades and the widespread Kiddush Hashem amongst the early Ashkenazi communities. Shmuley, could you take us to
A
line
particularly
11?
subtle point. A particularly subtle point relates to the fundamental distinction between Shmad imposed by a ruler for his own benefit, Lahana'at Atzmo, and for the sole purpose of destroying the Jewish faith. In the former case, as long as the sin in question is not one of the three cardinal ones, and according to Maimonides, Islam is not idolatry, then one is not required to die a martyr's death, even if the sin is performed in public. Indeed, according to Maimonides, if a Jew chooses death in such circumstances, he has transgressed the biblical precept of V'chai Bohem, and you shall live in keeping the mitzvot, to which the Talmud adds, and you shall not die because of the mitzvot.
Rambam is always good at forcing the point, okay? Not only is the person who dies when they should, in fact, commit this so-called sin not guilty, but he's in fact a sinner because he's broken the positive mitzvah of living, okay, through the mitzvot, v'chai bahem. In the latter case,
martyrdom is required in relation to all mitzvot, provided that there is public knowledge, that is, 10 Israelites are present at the time. Maimonides proves on the basis of the fact that the Muslim prince knew that the Jews were proclaiming the Shahada solely for the purpose of saving their lives, careers, and property, that he was only interested in his own benefit, namely the economic prosperity brought to the region by their presence. Hence, their sin was in the category of Hanat Atzmo.
Now, this is a cardinal point in Kiddush, in Shmad. If the one who wants to force the Jews to give up their religion is doing it because he wants to uproot Judaism, then you have to give up your life. Again, if it will be real avodah zarah and a concrete act, and you could say that you had some type of choice. But if it's la'anat atzmo, if the king wants you to break Shabbat because he wants you to bake him a cake or make him a donut,
cannot be shelled at once.
Can we please have whoever's speaking mute silent?
Details of war. What are they?
I don't know who is making the noise. Okay, anyhow. So Rambam, therefore, and this is again a sentence that's often overlooked. It's translated from Arabic, so it's difficult to pick up all the points that Rambam makes. But this idea, la'afis da'ato shel hamelech, means that everything that the Almohadis are doing is for their benefit. And because of Taqiyya, they don't mind if you go through the motions. That's enough. It's a far cry from anything like apostasy or shmad that is destroying the Jewish religion. We also know, okay, that let's read. Finally, Maimonides takes pains to emphasize
that the type
Fabia,
of okay.
Are you there? Fabia may not be there. So who is reading?
Sam
I was.
Ian. Finally.
Sam was reading. Which line?
Right.
25.
25.
Finally, Maimonides takes pains to emphasize that the type of shmad dealt with in the Talmud and cognate literature involved breaking the commandments either actively or by neglect. It did not revolve entirely around the making of a statement, which in any case was not sincere. The Muslim authorities also knew full well that the Jews were only declaring the Shahada in order to survive, and they did not adopt the harsh surveillance practices which would be enforced by the Inquisition in a later period.
Major difference between Islam and Christianity here, okay? Now, the next line, of course, is another Maimonidean dig. This powerful distinction
was completely ignored by the foreign responder, says Maimonides, much to his cost.
So
What means?
this is an outline of Rambam's basic justification in halakhic terms for the recital of the Shahada. So let me go back then and show how he then balances this, okay, by urging all the Jews to leave as soon as possible. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to go down to Bernie. Would you like to read?
Oh, I'm just got here and I'm relocating to another room.
Ah, okay. So I'll let you off the hook.
Okay, now. Okay, what
Okay.
line are we looking at?
Page 2, line 32, in order to maintain a proper balance. Line 32.
Yes, got it.
Yeah.
In order to maintain a proper balance in terms of Kiddush Hashem, Maimonides declares that those who do opt for martyrdom are clearly at an extremely high spiritual level.
Yeah.
And will be rewarded by heaven accordingly. Psachim, etc.
Hananya, Mishael, Azaria, nobody is like them. Okay, the famous sugya of the Tzfardim who made Exera Shava and threw themselves into the ovens. But anyhow, that's the sugya there. However, one who does not choose martyrdom, Bernie?
Does not choose martyrdom, has admittedly omitted to sanctify God's name, but is still very much within the fold. And any mitzvot he performs, albeit in secret, will merit reward in the hereafter.
Remember, one of the criticisms made by the foreign responder was that if you've said the Shahada, you become an idolater, and doing mitzvot is an act of hypocrisy. In fact, you're just furthering your Chilul Hashem, okay? And sometimes you even go into a mosque and you say Shema or Amida in the mosque. But remember, under Taqiyya, you could do that. A Muslim could go into a synagogue and say whatever he wanted to say, and it would not be considered to be a desecration. So it's a very different mindset, okay? And Rambam also says that Kiddush Hashem, one second, Ian, is a continuum. There is a halachic requirement to do Kiddush Hashem, which is fairly limited. I'm going to raise this afterwards in the discussion as to whether this is halachic or rhetorical. It's a limited act of Kiddush Hashem, but it has a periphery as well. Clearly, if you want to show that you're proudly Jewish, then you'll have nothing to do with anything that's non-Jewish from a theological perspective. If you do so, it's a great and wonderful thing. But you don't have to, and you should certainly not feel that if you have somehow admitted a different type of spirituality, that you can no longer keep functioning as a Jew. Yes, you can. So this will apply to Jews all over at any time. Say you've been forced to make a declaration, to say something, okay? Can you keep mitzvot in secret or not in secret? Yes, you can, okay? So this is the point that the Rambam wants to make here. But he goes on to say you need to leave. Ian, you wanted to say something.
It could be after the discussion. Well, I'll be quick.
Okay.
It's if the Jews value life, then the whole atmosphere of a Muslim and Islam, you can do anything in Islam if it's for the sake of the Ummah. Like you can lie, you can cheat, you can murder, you can do. So in that atmosphere, why should the Jew not only worry about his life? That's all he should.
Okay, I'm not sure what the question is. You'll have to sharpen it, okay? But all I'm saying is that the Taqiyya helps you. Now, what the Muslims do in the name of Islam usually has a little more than that, Ian, okay? They don't say you can lie, but they have a lot of different contexts for truth and many situations in which you can tell a half-truth, Okay, the question is what you're trying to do. There's a difference between salam and sulha. Okay, sulha is something which can be thought of as what you're trying to do, whereas your interlocutor, who's a Westerner, thinks that you're talking about salam. Okay, so taqiyya is in fact a very good illustration of this concept that it's not Kantian. It's not Immanuel Kant who said you may never lie, even if it is to save someone's life. Okay, that's very Christian. All or nothing. The Islamic world is nothing like all or nothing. Okay, it's all gradations. And since you agree with me on that, we're going to push on. He also emphasizes line 37. Bernie, going to take us away because we're coming to the end. He also emphasizes
that one is duty bound to leave those places in which Jews are subject to Shmad as soon as possible, so that he can both declare his faith and observe all the commandments freely.
And remember, the Muslims did not go around checking on you. There was no inquisition, and they didn't pay much attention. Rambam was able to live with his family, his father and his brother in Fez, in Al-Mohadi, Morocco, for about 8 years, apparently studying Torah, fulfilling the mitzvot. Okay. It is wrong to
peg the Exodus from a place of Shmad to the coming of the Messiah. This view, which espoused by many
the word was is missing.
Which was espoused by many of the mystics of the time, is a completely erroneous one in both halachic and theological terms. Moreover, Maimonides opines that more often than not, it was used in order to justify sheer avarice.
Now, I'm translating from the original, his very strong language, okay? Rambam never spared any punches. Now, of course, he doesn't like messianism at the best of times. Mashiach is a state where nothing miraculous is going to happen. Jews are going to have sovereignty. You cannot plan your life according to the coming of a Mashiach, I'm afraid. Don't let anybody Chabad hear this, okay? But, and the reason why they are praying the Mashiach on their part is because they want to stay comfortable in Morocco or Spain with their property, namely a desire to hold on, Bernie, to...
Namely, a desire to hold on to material possessions rather than to venture out to a land where the laws of God may be pursued in freedom and peace. It is important to realize that the mitzvah to return to the Holy Land is entirely independent of the appearance of the Messiah. In Maimonides' view, the advent of the Messianic period simply serves to usher in a period of tranquility when the Jewish people will be able to devote more time and energy to their intellectual pursuits and spiritual perfection. Directing Judaism away from a Messiah or from a Messiah-oriented belief system was undoubtedly one of Maimonides' important contributions to Jewish theology.
Okay, so that's a bit of balance. Leave if you can, and don't use the Mashiach as an excuse to stay in a place where your Judaism is not the best, okay? You're not an idolater. You haven't broken the prohibition on Kiddush Hashem. You're not a Mechalel Hashem in the full sense of the word. That's not a good place to be. Leave. Next time, I'm going to read you a translation of Maimonides' the last two bits just to deepen these points. And then we'll also have a look at his Mishneh Torah and look at his letter to Ovadia Ger Tzedek of Baghdad about Islam not being idolatry, but also we'll see his humaneness come out there too. I'm stopping the share. And now we have a few minutes, if anybody wants, for a question or a comment on what we've done tonight. Jean, you are first.
One question and one remark. The question is, what do you think that Rambam would have said to the same people if he was living in 1392, let us say, or in 1492? This is the question.
A very good question it is. And let's have a look at that in greater detail when we talk about the Rivash. Yitzchak Bar Sheshet, the persecution of French Jewry in 1391, 1392. And again, the rumor that the Rivash somehow was an
Apostate.
anus, exactly, an apostate, because he was forced. So we'll talk about that then in greater detail. But for the present, Rambam's starting point is that Islam is not idolatry. Christianity may very well be. But had he been living in a Christian milieu and had he been confronted with something similar, would any of his arguments have worked, or would he have found different arguments? Now, what I want to say, the only thing I'm going to say at this stage, Jean, is that I think that the Rambam is, as I said, clearly in Igeret Hashmad, a Meshiv. He's taking a specific problem, very located in the events of his time, and finding a creative way to get to his end result, which is to provide comfort to his brethren. His family have been through this. His bar mitzvah year was the year when the Almohades conquered Cordoba. He and his family were persecuted and wandered around the Iberian Peninsula for 8 years before they surfaced in Fez. And he has a deep sympathy and empathy with the Anusim of the 12th century, okay? So his goal is the first thing. And his anger with the foreign responder is great. Not because necessarily halachically, but in terms of where is your responsibility for your fellow Jews? So once you have that as the starting point, then all the other arguments can be filled in. And I was going to raise this point. I'm just going to leave you to mull over it because we'll talk about it next week. How much of this Rambam is halacha? How much is rhetoric? In other words, finding little building blocks here and there to put together to make an edifice, which will make the situation much more palatable, okay? I think that it is a combination of the two, and I also think that this is the job of the Meshiv. The difference between a posek who writes a code of law and the Meshiv who writes a tshuva is exactly this, that I relate to a particular situation, and I do so when I have a starting point in my head or in my heart, and then I marshal the sources, okay? Like a fachman, I take the building materials and I create a crafted object, as opposed to staying with the theoretical materials that I have and building my argument on that basis. But we'll come back to this in greater detail when we deal with the Rivash. And your comment, Jean.
Oh, and the comment is that mutatis mutandis, the Baalei HaTosfot, if you forget the religious problem, they also accepted that you make an oath with a mental reservation, and morally it's much weaker because it conducts to lie.
Exactly. That's the opinion of Bet Hillel of the Mishnah. It's a Mishnah Muforeshet and Masechet Muzarim. Bet Shammai says no, and Bet Hillel says yes. Bet Shammai says you can make a neder, which is less strict, but Bet Hillel says you can make a shvuah too when you do not. So the idea of intentionality goes in a line from Hillel to the Rambam, and it finds its expression here in Igeret HaShmad. Thank you. Any more?
Yeah, I had a comment. I had a comment that came to mind that and he kind of alluded to this. This was kind of a very short-term, one-off situation where he's addressing, because you can't use this as a long-term way of staying in this Muslim society, because you got to raise kids, you got to have grandchildren.
Absolutely.
You can't all. I mean, how would you be if
That's
you were?
Why he says you've got to leave as soon as you can. But in the interim, when you can't leave, don't give up hope. You are not excised from the Jewish people. You're still there, okay? And that was what the Rambam was trying to do. Remember, his father, Hadayan Maimon, wrote the Igeret Nechama, the letter of comfort. It was the starting point of the Maimon family who experienced this, and that's the big difference. They experienced this. They know how it felt. And therefore, Rambam, the young Rambam, as I said, he's only 26 when he writes this, fulminates against the foreign responder, and he's speaking to his co-religionists whom he understands and feels for. But he does say, like me, as soon as you can leave, and he went to Eretz Israel, as we know, okay? And their ship capsized or foundered on the way to the port of Akko, and there was a Maimon family Purim to celebrate their redemption from the waves, okay? But he didn't last that long. The family didn't last that long in Israel. Things were very tough in a crusader-ruled Eretz Israel, and eventually they found refuge in Egypt, as we know. But that's the whole point about a tshuva. It is directed to a specific, very time-oriented set of circumstances. But you can copy the method, that's the thing, and apply it to other situations that may be on all fours. So I wish everybody a very good evening. Besorot tovot. Next week we continue and do a couple more tshuvot of the Rambam. We meet Ovadia, the righteous Ger from Baghdad, okay, and a couple more, and then we're going to go into Rambam, the responder, who is the arch rationalist, and the law of the Katlanit, and his letter on astrology. All of that in the next couple of weeks. Have a very good evening.
Yasher koach.
Have a quiet.
Everyone in Israel
have a quiet evening and a good night's sleep.
We do, as someone once said rather jokingly, Kelavi Yakum is the name of this campaign. The people shall rise like a lavi, a lioness, but it shouldn't be every 4 hours. Okay.
Well, it'll happen in 1 week.
All the best.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Regards at home too. Bye. At 14 or 15.
So how
I'll just ring. That was very nice of Robert Vessel. Very good.
Jeffrey Sachs? You went in with Jeffrey Sachs last Wednesday night.
Yeah, but it's obviously not happening. So he's going to have a.
Totally should make the consequence.
Yeah.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Caroline,
Yes.